You know the story: a poisoned apple, 7 dwarfs, and a princess revived by love. But the true origins of Snow White are nothing like the fairy tale. In 16th century Germany, a nobleman's daughter named Margaretha von Waldeck died young, surrounded by courtly intrigue, a hostile stepmother, and whispers of poison. Her world was haunted by exploited child miners and deadly family rivalries. The answers are hidden in a trail of forgotten documents, and what they reveal will upend everything you thought you knew. The earliest written form of Snow White would have startled anyone expecting a gentle fairy tale. When the Brothers Grimm published their first edition in 1812, the story's horrors were unvarnished. The villain was not a stepmother, but Snow White's own biological mother, who, driven by envy, ordered her huntsman to kill the child and bring back her lungs and liver. The mother's demand was not symbolic. She planned to cook and eat the organs for supper. This act of cannibalism, shocking even by the standards of old folklore, was recorded in the manuscript with chilling clarity. "Bring me her lungs and liver, that I may eat them." The violence did not end there. When the huntsman returned with the organs of a wild animal instead, the queen devoured them, believing she was consuming her daughter's flesh. Later, after Snow White's apparent death, the prince did not awaken her with a kiss. Instead, he negotiated with the dwarfs and purchased her glass coffin. The prince's obsession with the beautiful corpse, his refusal to bury her, his insistence on keeping her body, casts a cold light on the tale's romantic veneer. Only when a servant stumbled and dislodged the piece of poisoned apple did Snow White gasp back to life. Over the years, these brutal details were softened. The mother became a stepmother. The cannibal feast vanished. The prince's morbid longing was rewritten as a magical kiss. But the original manuscript, annotated and revised by the Grimms themselves, preserves a record of the story's darkness, a darkness that demands explanation. What kind of world produced such a tale? The answer lies not in fantasy, but in the harsh realities of 16th century Germany, where the line between legend and lived experience was razor thin. Margaretha von Waldeck entered the world in 1533, baptized into a family whose name carried weight across the wooded valleys of northern Hesse. Her father, Count Philip, ruled over copper mines and patchwork lands, but the household itself was far from harmonious. After Margaretha's mother died when she was just a child, Philip remarried. The new countess, Katharina of Hatzfeld, arrived in 1539, bringing her own lineage and ambitions into the Waldeck court. Official records, baptismal entries, and marriage contracts trace the formalities of this union, but behind the ink and seals, daily life grew tense. The Waldeck family registers note Margaretha's presence, but her upbringing soon shifted. Letters from the period describe her as quiet, devout, and reserved. Yet the diary of a court scribe hints at something more, a rivalry, subtle but persistent, between the young Margaretha and her stepmother. Katharina, nearly a decade younger than Philip, was expected to guide her stepdaughter in the ways of nobility, but whispers in the corridors spoke of coldness and calculation. The marriage contract signed in 1553 spelled out dowries and obligations, but it could not legislate affection. Tension simmered in the household. In 1554, the scribe wrote that the tension between the stepmother and the young Margaret grew, and that whispers circulated that the Lady of Hatzfeld sought to secure the county for her own offspring. Margaretha's world became one of careful steps and watchful eyes, a noble woman's childhood shaped by the silent contest for power and inheritance. In these rooms, the seeds of suspicion and rivalry took root, destined to echo far beyond the castle walls. Margaretha's world extended far beyond the stone corridors of Waldeck Castle. By her late teens, she was already a name whispered in the courts of Central Europe. An inventory from 1550 lists a trunk of fine dresses, a French grammar, and a lute, items that traveled with her as she moved between noble households. Her presence is recorded at the 1551 wedding of Landgrave Wilhelm IV of Hesse Castle, a gathering that drew envoys from across the Holy Roman Empire. Among the guests, Spanish observers noted her beauty and poise, traits that did not go unnoticed by those invested in dynastic alliances. Travel permits issued in 1552 chart her journey to Heidelberg, where her stepmother's brother Count Wolfgang of Hatzfeld held influence at the Palatinate court. These permits, stamped and signed by city officials, reveal a young woman moving through a web of political obligation, each stop another opportunity for her family to secure favor or alliance. Letters from Spanish envoys preserved in the Brussels archives mention Margaretha by name, describing her as the fair lady of Waldeck and speculating on her suitability for marriage into higher circles. Such attention carried risk. In the volatile climate of Reformation Europe, a noblewoman's value was measured as much in her alliances as in her inheritance. The more visible Margaretha became, the more she was drawn into the silent contest between German princes and Spanish courtiers. Her movements, tracked by permits and wedding rolls, marked her as both asset and threat, a pawn on a board where the stakes were measured in land, loyalty, and survival. Margaretha's final months unfold in a series of letters that grow harder to decipher as time passes. The handwriting, once even and composed, becomes shaky. Lines wander, words tremble. Her testament, drafted in Brussels in early 1554, bears the marks of a hand struggling to hold steady. These letters, preserved in the Waldeck archives, reveal more than fading strength. They trace the slow progress of an invisible enemy. A physician summoned to her bedside recorded a litany of symptoms: sudden bouts of vomiting, relentless convulsions, and a darkness spreading across her gums. The account, copied into Dr. Johann von Berg's Heilbuch, offers no comfort, only confusion. He writes of a pallor that no fever could explain, of spasms that left Margaretha unable to sign her name without a scribe's help. The words blackening of the gums stand out, a detail that would later draw the attention of medical historians searching for the fingerprints of arsenic. No wound, no outward sign of violence, only a body betraying itself from within. The collapse at the midsummer banquet, the whispered prayers at her bedside, the helplessness of the doctors, all point to a death that defied easy explanation. In the absence of answers, suspicion settled over the court like a shroud, and Margaretha's trembling signature became the first clue in a forensic mystery that would haunt her name for centuries. Beneath the forests of Waldeck, the mines cut deep into the earth and into the lives of its youngest workers. Payroll ledgers from Bad Wildungen record dozens of boys, some as young as 7, bound to the copper and silver pits for a daily wage barely enough to keep hunger at bay. Their names appear in neat columns, each one assigned to a master, each contract promising food and shelter that seldom arrived. Medical surveys from 1553 reveal the toll. Child miners stood on average just 115 centimeters tall, nearly a head shorter than other children in the region. Years spent crawling through cramped, wet tunnels left their backs bent and limbs twisted, their bodies shaped by stone and darkness. Locals called them the short and crooked fellows, a phrase that would later echo in the description of dwarfs. These children did not sing or dance. They worked from dawn until dusk, their labor fueling the fortunes of families like the Waldecks. In their suffering, the fairy tale's helpers take on a different form, less magical, more human, and marked by the scars of survival. 16th century apothecaries, well versed in the art of both healing and harm, left behind manuals that read as warnings for the wary. The Frankfurt House Apothecary Manual of 1550 cautioned that apples, sweet and inviting, made the perfect disguise for deadly intent. Powdered arsenic, the so-called white pestilence, could be mixed with honey or syrup and painted onto fruit, the poison drying to an invisible sheen. In the imperial court of 1541, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria fell victim to arsenic slipped into his wine, a method so subtle that only the blackened tongue and bitter almond breath betrayed the crime. The Grimms, drawing on tales that circulated for centuries, gave their evil queen a fate as chilling as her crimes. Red-hot iron shoes forced onto her feet, dancing in agony until death. Such punishments echoed real executions in German principalities, where iron shoes were heated in the fire for traitors. The tale's mirror, too, may have roots in the Earthall glassworks, famed for their polished glass, objects that reflected both beauty and peril. In the end, the poisoned apple and the queen's fiery end stand as haunting reminders in the world behind Snow White. Every sweetness hid a threat, and retribution was as brutal as the betrayal. Centuries later, the line between fairy tale and historical cruelty still blurs. True stories, shrouded in legend, worn of power wielded in shadows, and innocence lost to ambition. As we retell old myths, we risk forgetting the real people behind them. Sometimes, the darkest truths hide where fantasy begins.